Hello, everyone. I just wanted to, if you're already joined, we're going to wait a few minutes to see who else is going to join. So just stand by and we'll get started here shortly. So we're still seeing people join, so I'm going to give it a couple more minutes as everyone kind of gets settled in here, and then we'll be off to the races. So just stand by for just a few minutes. All right, so let's get started. First, I want to welcome everyone to today's webinar on hybrid hunting, threat hunting in a managed security battle space. I'm Scott Poley, a senior threat hunter at Cyborg Security, and I'm thrilled to be joined by Justin Hurd, who's a manager of threat hunting and intelligence at Nuspire. Today, we're going to explore the benefits of hybrid models of threat hunting delivered by managed security service providers, where a customer may outsource their threat hunting efforts, or even if they retain some of the security functions internally, or vice versa. We'll be discussing prerequisites for threat hunting, hunting maturity, reporting and metrics, and both quick and strategic wins that threat hunting has had for customers and clients. And most importantly, an operational perspective on threat hunting from threat hunters doing the job. So as the threat landscape continues to evolve, it's more important than ever to have an effective threat hunting strategy in place. But we know many organizations struggle to find the resources or expertise to do it effectively in-house. That's where hybrid hunting comes in. It's a powerful model that lets you divide security tasks between your internal teams and an MSSP to create an unbeatable threat detection and response force. So whether you're just getting started with threat hunting or looking to improve your existing program, this webinar will provide valuable insights and practical guidance on program development and management. With real-world examples of successful hybrid hunting implementations, you should be inspired to take the lead in your organization's cybersecurity defense. So sit back, grab a cup of coffee, and get ready to dive into hybrid hunting, threat hunting in a managed security battle space. Now, before we get started, I want to remind everyone that this is supposed to be an interactive session. We're looking forward to hearing your questions, so please don't hesitate to throw them in the chat. We'll either answer them directly or highlight them in the Q&A portion. Also, please note that this session will be recorded and will be sent out shortly after the event. We want to make sure that you have all the information you need to start leveraging hybrid hunting for your organization, and the best way to do that is to have an open dialogue and address those questions and concerns that you may have. So, getting started, we're going to kind of talk about hybrid hunting. So, Justin, what is hybrid hunting? How would you define that?
Hello, Scott. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. Thanks for the introduction there. So hybrid hunting. I think, for me, hybrid hunting is the combination of internal security teams and service providers coming together. I think it's a really good way to compensate for a lack of expertise or the amount of expertise you need to keep in-house in order to have a successful threat hunting organization.
So why do you feel hybrid hunting is kind of a necessity in today's combined world?
There's a couple reasons that come to mind. First one being the amount of expertise and experience that it takes to be or have a lot of successful hunts is pretty high. And so, with an MSSP, you get a lot of exposure and experience to different types of attacks, different hunts on different types of devices, different EDRs, SIM solutions, and so on and so forth. And then the second part of that is the customer side. Threat hunting or hybrid threat hunting is a really good partnership between the service provider and the internal teams. No one knows the network as intimately as the internal teams, and so working together to help validate baseline things is really important. And so that's where I think the hybrid model makes us more potent when it comes to threat hunting.
That makes sense. So what are some of the opportunities with hybrid hunting?
So it kind of gives you a head start, right? You can kind of jump in with little to no experience with threat hunting, just knowing that, what the benefits of it are and that you want to do it. And so attaching with a service provider to kind of help guide you through that, using proven processes to discover threats that aren't typically discovered by standard detection methods. It needs a human eye to look at to figure out what's going on. I think those are some of the biggest opportunities with hybrid threat hunting is just a head start, right? Someone who can go through the process with you to build out your program.
So with doing hybrid hunting, what are some of the challenges that you've kind of seen or faced?
So anytime you talk about hunting, you can't talk about it without talking about coverage. And so I think knowing what technology, what log sources produce the best results for threat hunting is a bit of a challenge. And so making sure that those things are in place for the client. And then the other part of that is baselining normal activity. There's always kind of a spin up process when starting threat hunting and especially hybrid threat hunting, for the service provider to understand what's normal with inside that environment. And so that can take some time to really start vetting those things out. And I think that can be a little bit of a challenge from a hybrid hunting standpoint.
And lastly, to kind of help define the hybrid hunting, I'm sure people have questions about is what kind of technologies are really required for the hybrid hunting, engagement?
Yeah, and you'll see this kind of goes with the challenges a little bit, knowing what technologies you need to fill that gap is very important. I would say, in my mind, EDR, SIM solution to aggregate all that information into one spot for your threat hunters or threat hunting teams to take a look at. Firewalls, when you get a little bit more advanced, threat intelligence platforms help you prioritize your hunts, which is kind of the first part of the threat hunt experience. And then you can even get into things like automation and so on and so forth as your program starts to mature through like a SOAR platform. But I'd say the primary ones are the SIM solution, EDRs, and firewall security logs.
Cool. So let's kind of pivot into kind of hunting maturity here, because I think we did a good job kind of laying out what hybrid hunting is. So how does leveraging an MSSP for threat hunting help organizers fast track their threat hunting efforts?
Yeah, I think, a big part of threat hunting is the processes. And so what do we do? How do we perform a threat hunt? And so being an MSSP, we can bring those processes with us. and kind of say, this is where we've had success, and we can augment them to work with that client's environment. And so that gives a really good head start to hunting in general. Is like, here's a process, here's what we do when we find something, and kind of working through that chain with them. And then, the MSSP having a lot of experience and expertise hunting multiple types of environments for multiple different types of attack is very beneficial with this model. I would say, the MSSP will have hunts already. So hunts that are, that give good results, that touch techniques that are highly used by threat actors. And so that's another jumping point, for the service provider to already have some stuff to start hunting right away, given that we have the right log sources.
Yeah, so you mentioned process, and that kind of brings me back to some training I did many years back where they were trying to talk about threat hunting in my earlier cyber days or security professional days. And they did kind of preach on they had all these really talented people and they wanted to threat hunt. So they said go find bad, because sometimes that misconception of threat hunting is just you just go look for things. And there's more to it than that. And when they did that, they didn't have a lot of success. They're these smart people, and they kind of came back with their hands empty as far as like, well, maybe we have some things, maybe we don't. But when they kind of had that defined process and kind of reconvened and say, let's look for these specific things, or like, let's walk through it kind of in a procedural manner, not just, go out and grab whatever you can. They saw a lot of success with that. So I think that process piece is really important that you called out. So I like that a lot.
Yeah, for sure. Is it your experience that most organizations have enough logging already to support threat hunting operations?
Yeah, I would say they typically do. So you don't need everything. Obviously, visibility is very important because threat hunting is data driven, but especially if you have a security operation center that's already kind of collecting or centralizing data, you can already leverage the data you're collecting. And typically you're collecting things like, process execution, a lot of times command line arguments, and just that common security log base. And then especially if you have EDR tools in place, there's tons of great telemetry that's generated by those tools. And then typically when there are specific gaps, you'll see that threat actors will try to avoid the traditional logs or create different artifacts that you may not log. But as you mature threat hunting and you've already kind of started those processes and have been doing it a while, then you can figure out how to augment some of those things with, say, some sysmon logging and things like that. So but I think you always seem to always have the data available to at least get started for sure.
Yeah, I think you touched on it a little bit there. Like, I think it is a common misconception that you need everything to start out. Obviously you want to mature your program over time, but threat hunting can be simple in the beginning, and then just start to mature as you need to find more things, or you build great processes around those simple things. And so I think that's a great point there.
Yeah, so if an organization is looking to implement hybrid hunting, what are some of the things they can do to prepare for that?
Yeah, I think you're going into an engagement with the customer already kind of aware of their environment, what they have, what they don't have, is really good. So understanding their coverage, their gaps, helps a little bit. I think also, it's never too early to start building processes and procedures around threat hunting. What is our end goal of threat hunting? Kind of get that written down, and actually get these things written down to where you can recall them. What's the process if we do find something? Where are we sending it? Who's taking care of it? Threat hunting can produce different types of results. So it can produce detections where you may need another team that's creating detections within those different devices, but it can also just create reports or information, which is also very helpful. And so I think having those processes already in place, or having an idea of what those processes should be, and having an idea of what your coverage is now and maybe where some gaps is a good starting point for approaching a service provider.
Your point.
So how do you address visibility challenges? I know we've talked a little bit about logging here. Challenges in an organization when it comes to hunts you are trying to deploy. Do you require certain levels of logging or data collection?
Yeah, so typically when we work with people, we have kind of the defaults or the types of logs we typically are hunting in. as part of that. But one of the things we also produce with a lot of our hunt packs is ways to emulate that. So you can immediately see, hey, do we have that visibility or not? Because we've seen in some cases where if say a customer is using an EDR tool specifically, some EDR tools don't look at certain artifacts. And in those cases, we offer different types of sysmon logging that you could enable with configs, or what logging you should enable on the endpoint so you can collect that data differently. It's not the end of the world, because when you're looking for bad things, there's layers to that. So if you don't see that one layer, there's other places to look. But that's typically how we try to enable customers to determine what kind of logging they need to be able to emulate that behavior, to validate it, but also give them other opportunities to see that data if they can.
Yeah, I mean, that emulation piece is super important, and that's a great part of the platform you guys have, is to be able to create that log to see if you have that coverage. And so that's an easy way to help customers identify gaps by just running emulations to see if the hunts actually work in their environment, which is really great. We use a lab environment to do kind of some of the same things there, but the emulations are great to, hey, let's produce that log to see if we can find it. And so I think that's a great approach to some visibility challenges and kind of help building that program over time.
Yeah, so let's kind of switch to some, reporting and metrics kind of a topic, right? We're talking about, finding things as far as like visibility. I know when we report that kind of comes up a lot too, but what do the results of a threat hunt look like once it's completed and delivered to a client, on your side? What are the kind of like the deliverables you guys typically cover down on for that?
Yeah, I think these are sometimes overlooked from a threat hunting perspective, but I think very important to give visibility because a hunt that doesn't return results is not a bad hunt. And then if you have those emulations in there and understand that your coverage, your visibility on those things are great, it's good. We're looking at things, we're prioritizing on trends and things of that nature. So I think reporting is really important, and metrics around that to give an example of how well your threat hunt program is doing. Deliverables for us can range, so it can be as simple as a report with details. If we have a finding for a specific customer, it can kind of be an overarching report that just says, hey, these are the hunts that we've done in your environment, based off of these dependencies. They can be follow-ups with the client, where maybe we found something that maybe is suspicious, and we need that validation. That kind of where that partnership comes into play. Maybe it's normal for encrypted PowerShell to be used to push something from an admin, but we may see it as malicious, and so that partnership comes into play there. So I think those are some of the big deliverables of hunting. Reports, findings, detections are really great deliverable from hunting. It's just a hunt that we don't have to recreate again.
Right.
We can detect it, and we can kind of set it and forget it and update it when we need to. That's another really good deliverable from the threat hunting process.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah. So on your side, what kind of metrics do you track for hunts, either internally or externally?
So yeah, we have as part of our platform, we have a hunt module, we call it, and it kind of helps facilitate that reporting, as well as kind of like scheduling things for people to do kind of the internal hunt process. But in that reporting module, we allow people to put in their own notes as they're hunting, alongside all the contextual data we have from our hunt packs. That usually has some of the intel pieces, the type of things they're hunting for, and then kind of the outcomes of those hunt reports. And there's similar outcomes and metrics that you kind of mentioned before, right? Like identifying visibility gaps is a big one, especially when you can apply emulation to know it's a gap or just a no find. And then the no findings, which is good. If you're looking for a specific behavior, especially if you feel very confident it's tied to this adversary and they use it repeatedly, the no findings means they're just not there, or at least they're not using that technique. And then that detection piece, right? Everyone always wants to have more detections or more reliable detections, and I think when you're able to mature that hunt to the point where you're not getting false positives anymore in your environment, and you're able to make that detection, I mean, that's a really high fidelity detection that you kind of really baked in. So you can have really good processes around that detection versus you're having to start from square one every time that alert pops. And then we kind of have that catch-all escalated kind of bucket. And this is basically means, hey, we found something we need to then share with another team or move it somewhere else to be looked into further. And so that's kind of how we do that. But one of the things we keep track of, which I do like, and I think it helps with building those detections, especially if you're doing that repeated hunt over time, are all the kind of pivots that you may have done in your hunt. And that's just because it shows what are additional steps you had to take to either exclude certain things from your hunt or things that you may have to tweak in order to get to the kind of root cause of whatever it is you're investigating. And that either helps with the response actions if you turn into a detection from that operational piece, or helps with how do we make this a detection to begin with. So I think those are good places too. So that's some of the things we do, I think.
Yeah, I think metrics are really strong, and it's sometimes hard to know where to start. Like, how do I measure how effective I'm being? So I really do like the idea of measuring how many pivots to understand. Was my hunt efficient to begin with?
Mm-hmm.
Are there some things that I need to tweak to make it more efficient over time? It's a really really cool perspective there.
Yeah, so I think we're going to pivot into threat hunting wins, and I know you had some starting topics for that, so I don't know if you want to kick that off.
Yeah, I think from your side, what are some quick wins you've seen from threat hunting or hybrid threat hunting in general?
Yeah, so one of the things I think it really helps when you kind of share that load of threat hunting, especially a lot of organizations, if they're not doing that really proactive, very mature threat hunting process, they kind of have threat hunting as a capability, but it's kind of more that ad hoc fashion where as things come up, they kind of drop what they're doing, especially if that's not their primary role, to then start threat hunting. The emerging threat piece is a big one. I think that helps because every security professional gets hit with that Friday afternoon, hey, this just hit the news, my manager's asking questions about this, or whatever, whatever pipe that comes down. And that becomes a huge burden and also a big stress inducer and anxiety problem there. And when you kind of have someone else looking at those emerging things as well, that are dedicating their time to helping to put together the relevant intel, the hunt packages that you can basically say, hey, we're looking internally based on what we know about our processes, but we have someone else who's feeding us exactly what we should be looking for from all the public reporting and things that they have access to. I think that's really a big win there because now your security team can be more streamlined and efficient. Sometimes when those things happen, it kind of feels like running around with your head cut off, like chicken with the head cut off, mentality. And it really kind of keeps that even keel. Let's just attack our normal processes, walk through our normal things, engage the people and services that we have that are looking at the same things. Because I know you guys probably monitor just like we do all the things that are emerging at a continuous fashion. So I think that's a really good win for a lot of teams.
Yeah, and prioritization is key a lot of times with
Yeah.
some of these things. I like when example that I can see for success is I like when we identify something trending, we create or we do a hunt on that, we build it, and the pot of gold within rainbow, we get a detection. Hey, there's
Yeah.
something inside of this that we can detect in the techniques that are being used by the actors, and then. A lot of times if those techniques are new, you'll see them adopted by other malware families. And
Mhm.
so now, not only did we stop, one malware family, we stopped multiple because they're using the same tactic. And so we've seen this even quite recently, where a tactic's being used, and then another threat actor picks up that tactic, but we're already detecting it, so we're kind of ahead. And so a lot of threat hunting, we're proactively going back, but the things that we can do really can protect us moving forward into the future. And so I think those are always great wins for hunts when things things like that can come out of it.
Yeah, I have to say when you mentioned like to be able to see it, actors adopting those techniques and things moving forward, ransomware has always been a big thorn in everyone's side, but when you look at those groups over time, they do a lot of the same things. So what you're
Mhm.
speaking to really helps address that problem as well that, a lot of people don't realize. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I was reading a report and they talked about ransomware in general. Seems like it's going down, but it's the techniques are being detected earlier in the stages. And so
mhm.
while the attack attempts are still about the same, the detection for the initial access or initial infections have gone up through threat hunting, through platforms and so on and so forth. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's a good example too. What are some strategic benefits an organization has seen from threat hunting?
Yeah, so I always like to think of, people think of threat hunting as it's just a tool within the security operation to help find bad things, right? But I feel like because you're doing proactive things, we talked about identifying visibility gaps, which is a big thing, but also that extends to just what's the native visibility of the solutions you're actually deploying in your security or technology stacks. Because a lot of times I feel like when I've uncovered visibility issues, it's when I'm proactively doing something, but I'm driven by, like, say, incident response, which is kind of like where you don't want to be discovering those things.
Yeah.
But if you're threat hunting, you're actively engaged with your products, you're actively engaged with different areas of your environment, so you're able to kind of pull those things out. And I think when you have that understanding um, of, like, maybe where security technologies overlap a lot, where there's gaps, visibility, and so forth, that really helps drive all those future projects or environmental changes, or maybe other technology you may need to implement, or technology you may need to retire and replace with something else. Those are those, like, 3 to 5 year type, planning, strategic moves that I think threat hunting creates a more of a data-driven decision than kind of that emotional decision that some people kind of fall into, like, hey, we need to do something. What should we do? Well, I heard this marketing ad. It sounds really cool. Let's try this. I think it's really good to have that. So I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, yeah, I like that point, and you see that a lot, right? You kind of throw the kitchen sink at it, because you
Yeah.
think you need this, you need that, you need this, but ultimately you just need to fill the gaps. And so I think threat hunting is a great way to try to identify those gaps prior to an IR, right? And so
Yeah.
so we don't get in and be like, oh, well, I really wish we had that logging, and that's where that hunting comes in place, where we've already looked at these things and
Mhm.
identified these gaps. And then it also gives you a chance to put some compensating controls in there. Is there something
Mhm.
else we can do while that project is kind of developing? And really helps the decision-making process, from a higher level. So.
Absolutely. So yeah, I want to kind of switch to, like, the operational perspectives, right? Because I think you and I have seen threat hunting in different lights, but we share a lot of commonalities there. So one of the things I'm really curious about from your perspective is, how does it benefit you being able to hunt across as much data as you have, since you have multiple customers and multiple environments to look at?
Yeah, I think I think it produces its own challenges, right? So
Mhm.
hunting multiple technologies can be a challenge. Multiple EDRs, multiple SIMs, and so on and so forth. I think the large data sets can be a challenge. So can your technology handle the size queries that you need? Are you able to
Mhm.
store as much data as you need in order to be able to threat hunt? But with that, I think there's a lot of benefits, and the benefits definitely outweigh some of the challenges once you can figure out how to get over those humps. Um, when you're looking at threat hunting and you're pulling results, the first thing we try to do is reduce the number of results. And the only way to really do that is to understand what's normal. And
Mhm.
so, almost like a machine learning or a grouping algorithm, we can tell what's normal based off of all the different data that we have, all the different devices, and kind of baseline what's normal, and put that into our queries to be more exact into what we're finding. And so I think that's a really strong way to be able to use that data to figure out what's normal across everybody's environment, and then kind
Mhm.
of pull that together. I think the other part of that is industry specific data. So we service a lot of different industries: healthcare, financial, manufacturing, and so we can group those together and look at the data differently. So we can say,
Mhm.
well, what are the attacks that we're seeing in this in this sector, and we can kind of build some detections and some hunting packages around that, and then understand what other people are seeing in comparison to another company or organization that's like them. And so that helps us a lot to be able to use that industry specific data to get down to that. When you have an MSSP and you have so many logs and so many different log sources, comes a lot of experience. You see a lot, you get to hunt a lot. Um, you discover those gaps, you discover different tactics and techniques that are being used across multiple entities. And then
Mhm.
the other side of the coin for that is that you can hunt one environment and then build that hunt to work on another environment, or you can be in an IR for somebody and identify some things that could potentially be good alerts inside the platforms for other customers, or good hunts or queries that can be produced. And so I think those are some big parts or some big benefits to having that much data to hunt across. But of course, it comes with some challenges as well.
Yeah, no, I like when you talk about understanding what's normal, because if you think about just security in general, we're really good at sharing bad things. Like, here's some bad things to look for, but like it's really hard to share what's normal to mature people that way. And that's more of an experience thing, or you have to just be able to see it, and you guys kind of have that visibility, which is really cool. So,
Yeah.
so go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, like, worst case scenario, you create a query and say, hey, here's your query, and they run it, and they're like, oh, we have all kinds of stuff going on because they don't understand what's normal as opposed to where the anomaly is, and which is
Yeah,
what we're really looking for at the end of the day.
yeah. So how does threat intelligence, so you manage threat intelligence too, right? So how does that factor into hybrid hunting?
So I think threat intelligence is super important. I think we're coming into a day and age where threat hunting and threat intel are working closer and closer together, and they
Mm,
should. I almost feel like they're becoming one entity because intelligence is important to prioritize the data and to build the hunting packages. I want my threat hunters to spend as much time as possible analyzing the data as opposed to figuring out what they should look at. And I think it's a partnership. I think both ways a threat hunter is going to find leads as well as an intel team. But the intel team, is really a big portion of that prioritization to figure out what's trending, and not only trending like on social media or different feeds that way, but what's trending in our data. And so looking at our data, we do a quarterly threat report every year, which is our quarterly threat report every quarter, and then we do one at the end of the year, which is basically that. We concatenate all the information we have from all our devices and figure out what the trends were. What's really attacking different customers, and then we can feed that over to the hunting team to say, hey, here are the trends. Can you guys build a
mm.
hunt around this? Or here's some other information. Can you build a hunt around this? So on and so forth. So I think intel is a huge part of threat hunting, and it'll continue to evolve over time as both of those kind of expertise continue to run the same path.
Yeah, I feel like with threat intelligence, there's like two avenues to operationalize that. That kind of goes into detection engineering a little bit, and then threat hunting. And you're kind of doing you're pulling two different types of threads within that threat intel report. But I also like how you discussed, when you start seeing multiple threat intelligence reports, you can kind of group together and see some commonalities between them to really make really effective hunts or trending behaviors, like when you use that term, because that really is where threat hunting becomes really powerful, because, like you said even earlier, adversaries adopt a lot of the same things that just work for at least a while, and if no one's looking for them,
Yeah.
they'll continue using them. So yeah, very cool. So with the threat hunts you guys perform, do you commonly perform those across multiple clients looking for that same consistent behavior? Like, how do you leverage that, or do you have to do a lot of tuning between that? How does that work?
Yeah, so we try to develop our hunts to be global, so we can globally look across as many devices as possible at a time. It does give more results to have to filter through, but we have been pretty successful with doing that. We also, like I mentioned before, we can find something in one environment and that may trigger us to create a detection or a query to hunt other environments.
Mm.
Through an IR engagement or through just a discovery in general. And so I think that's a really important piece of that. Being able to perform those hunts across multiple clients globally, and then we call them follow-on hunts, but basically branch out from there to say, okay, well, we need to look here, here, and here, and then
Mhm.
recreating that for maybe another customer or another set of customers to find that type of activity.
So you mentioned that, like, sets of customers. So do you do a lot of your threat hunting also considering the verticals of like your customers? So you assume they have the same risk or same problems they may have to deal with. Is that something that comes up too?
Yeah, for sure, and that kind of goes into prioritization model. If
Hmm.
we look at, let's say healthcare, we have a really good understanding of the different threat actors that are attacking that vector. And then with that, we know the tactics, techniques, tools, procedures that those threat actors use. And so if you overlay those two things together, you can understand, well, what are the most common things that they all use for this industry? And so that can create a very industry specific hunt for a group of clients. And so now we know what the most used techniques are between the threat actors that are attacking that vector, and we can attack those hunts for those specific client base.
So, I mean, I can see how there's a great success there. Can you kind of hit on some of the challenges you have with trying to hunt across multiple clients? Do you see challenges there as well, based on maybe available visibility or telemetry, or what that looks like across tools?
Yeah, so I think visibility is sporadic, so it depends on the client, the maturity of the client, what type of visibility we have, and so the dependency of the hunt does depend a lot on what data we're getting from that client. I think that can be a challenge. We touched on like the technology piece that's a lot of data to hunt. So if I hunt all of our devices for 90 days, we have to be able to have the back end to be able to support that. I think that can be a challenge as well. And then, with multiple technologies comes multiple queries. So, if we're writing a query for an EDR, we can't just write it for, one. We have to write it for 4, 5, 6 different EDRs, a couple different SIMs, so on and so forth. And so that can be a challenge as well, as kind of, recreating those queries. And there's subtle differences between each of them, right? Like what needs to be changed and tuning wise. So that can be a bit of a challenge, a little time consuming at times. But ultimately we can get good results out of it.
Very cool.
Can you talk to some success stories where threat hunting and working with a client proved to be a valuable solution?
Yeah, so within our platform, we're building our hunt packages and using our kind of lab environment to test it, validate it, emulate the behaviors and that kind of thing. But we don't have the visibility like you guys do to all the customer data to look what's normal, right? So we commonly will work with clients. We have a way for them to give feedback on different things, and sometimes they'll help us mature a hunt because they'll have their expertise in house, which is really cool to say, hey, here's some additional things that you may want to consider, or things we found, and we'll take that and we'll mature it, and it matures it for everybody, right? Which is always fantastic. In other cases, they'll say we see these things and we don't know what we're looking at, and with the same kind of feedback loop, we're able to work with our clients and say, yeah, no, that seems fairly normal. Some things you may want to exclude. If you need help understanding how to put those exclusions into your hunt and things like that, we work with them as well. But I do think there's a benefit, because threat hunting isn't just a set it and forget it type of process anyways, right? So anytime you can have engagement or feedback or that interaction, I think it always benefits both sides. So
yeah, I think that comes back to that strong partnership, and it looks like you guys just have a different flavor of doing that through the request and information or review you get back from the customer to tune the hunts, and that's what it comes down to. I think that's what makes hybrid hunting very powerful, is creating that partnership and that feedback loop to understand,
Absolutely.
are we doing good? Do you need something else? And is this normal in your environment? Is really great.
Yeah, so have you ever been able to provide threat hunting to clients that didn't actually have any threat hunting in place, or do you usually just try to modify?
Yeah, most of the time, honestly, threat hunting's still kind of new. Some customers, depending on maturity, have done a little bit of threat hunting, but we do this very often, and it's through the use of the processes that we've already vetted and created to be successful with threat hunting. We can share those with the client. We understand the visibility gaps and products that they may need to fill those gaps, and in some cases, an MSSP can fill in those gaps with the technologies they need. So yeah, I think we've been able to pick the ball up kind of wherever it's at on the court, and roll with it.
Very cool.
So I know threat hunting is supposed to help identify threats that get past standard detections and protections. From your experience, does that prove true? Are you routinely finding threats that circumvent standard detections and protections?
Yeah, so that's something that always kind of comes up. Behaviors, I feel like, and if you have experience looking and searching for specific malicious behaviors, they seem to persist a lot longer than your typical IOCs and things like that. And we kind of had a customer success story where we were working with a client and they took one of our hunts. It was about some initial access vector stuff, and they matured their hunt in their environment, so they felt very confident with their results, and so they kind of scheduled a routine type reporting to kind of email results if they got any about what they'll look for. And obviously they have a security operations center and analysts looking at alerts and things coming in as well. And they did get an alert in the security operations center from one of their EDR tools. And when they went through their processes and reached out to their endpoint, person at work, to try to discuss this alert, they said they were already on the phone with one of the threat hunters. So the threat hunters was able to identify that behavior before the payload or ending payload of that whole chain of attack got delivered and detected by the EDR. And it really wasn't about comparing one's better than the other. Really what I think that story highlights is it kind of filled two different gaps, right? And so, a lot of times if you can see where maybe the payload changes at the end of the day, because now people have hashes or other ways, or EDR tools have some sort of signatures to pick up on those things. Well, the payload changes, but the behavior doesn't. Threat hunting will still identify people trying to leverage that same technique to get their payloads in versus the ending payload. And I think that was really cool to kind of hear, one, how they kind of both identified the same thing, different parts, and how they work really well together. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important. Threat hunting is not a replacement for EDR, and EDR is not a replacement for threat hunting. I think they're very complementary to each other for the reasons that you highlighted there. The reason that we're threat hunting a query is probably because it can't be an alert, and so the EDR can't create alerts on some of the activity or behavior just because it'd flood the system and would become unusable.
Yeah.
I think that's where threat hunting comes in, where we can be a little bit less granular in some instances, and then use the human mind to kind of get to the anomalous behavior and all that information. So yeah, I think that's super important.
I was gonna bring up one additional point there that kind of, as you're talking through, that's one of the reasons why I think threat hunting is so important, because like you said, you can't put all that into a tool and have it do the alerts, because we're really hunting the human aspect almost of the threat. And a lot of them are trying to just use tools that exist on the systems they're going after. So they're not using customizable malware and tools now. They're using standard things that exist in the systems, and so they blend in better. And that's that lay of the land type of techniques. And so it'd be really hard for a tool to alert on all the activity around those necessarily. So
a lot of false positives, I would guess.
Yeah.
So we talked about hunts and prioritizing them, based off of trending data, which kind of brings up the question of how quickly do you typically turn around the hunt once it comes up in a hypothesis or whatever your prioritization system is.
Yeah, so typically it's 24 to 72 hours, but we say data dependent, and that's just because we don't want to push a hunt pack that's so experimental that we can't validate it ourselves. Because we would hate for someone to feel comfortable that, hey, we've got this covered and there's no real confidence that it's really being covered. Or if we have to do that, we make sure to very clearly, explain, hey, this is something that you could try, but we're not fully done with this if we had to push something early. But it's usually 24 to 72 hours data dependent. And it, typically, once we have a skeleton of the hypothesis is when we really start doing our own testing to start building that thing out. And so, like I said, when we generate our package and we're able to emulate the data, that also is part of that development cycle, so that not only are we pushing a pack that we can validate it ourselves, we try to make it, if possible, so you can validate it as well in your environment for part of that turnaround time.
Yep, makes a lot of sense.
So, how do you organize your threat hunting operations? Is it by client, by behaviors, by the emerging threats? Like, how do you kind of do your operation around all those things?
I think all the above. So if we think about like the first method of prioritizing, what we're going to hunt, we look at trending, large scale exploits that come out, things that are hot off the press, proof of concepts that come out. So we know that, actually external facing types of vulnerabilities that are easily exploitable that we think we can detect. We prioritize that stuff. We do, as I mentioned, threat actors, understanding threat actors that are actively attacking organizations and what types of organizations they're trying to attack. kind of pulling apart their tool sets, their TTPs, and hunting for that is another way. The threat intelligence team can prioritize based off of trends that we're identifying. And so, what malware do we see being used the most? What are some techniques that are being used the most? Where are they being successful? So I think that's another way to kind of prioritize that data as well.
So from that managed security perspective, what's really the largest value you feel you're bringing to threat hunting operations or to an organization in general?
From a managed security's perspective, that experience is huge. Being able to see multiple different types of attacks. A lot of threat hunts or organizations, they could be there for a year and never see anything. As an MSSP, we kind of have more exposure to a lot of the different attacks and exposure to doing threat hunts. And so it gives you that instant scalability to your organization. So you're basically adding threat hunters with lots of expertise to be able to look through your environment. I think your capabilities are increased through either identifying gaps in coverage or just hunting inside your environment. And so I think those are some of the main factors by using MSSP that you gain as a client.
Absolutely.
And so with threat hunts that you guys have performed in the past, do they seem to be more targeted intel driven or analytical outlier driven?
So yeah, we're kind of like to take the same approach. I think threat intelligence is really powerful. It's kind of where you learn how things operate and what they do. So we kind of focus on that. And then there's kind of I would say a middle ground in between intel driven and analytical driven, which I like to call profiling, where it's just like it's kind of like knowing thyself. And typically, we can help create some of these to help profile your own environment. But in like, how is, like, for instance, the latest vulnerability with Outlook, doing SMB callouts? How is SMB being utilized, and when is it trying to go external to your environment? That's kind of a way to profile that kind of behavior in general that can catch a lot of previous attacks that leverage that same behavior. And then when you have really good validated data, there is ways to do more of that statistical analysis, depending on what tools capabilities are, to kind of do that analytical driven. But Intel is, I think, a great place to start and kind of mature into those other areas that I kind of talked about. So.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more there.
Yeah, so what's the typical time window that you perform like reoccurring hunts? I know like hunting is kind of a process that you put in place, and you typically kind of revisit the same hunts or behaviors if they're still being effective and you're still looking for them. Is it like daily, weekly, maybe even hourly? Is there a specific time frame you guys usually leverage?
Yeah, it kind of depends on the hunt. I think it's important to age out your hunts as they become less valuable or less potent. Maybe threat actors have pivoted away from those, but we do have hunts that are active, or techniques that are actively used. So we try to look at those weekly, sometimes monthly. Probably not anything close to hourly. I think you probably need some sort of automation in place, or kind of as you mature the program a little bit more, and then we're kind of getting into the detection area then.
Yeah.
Where we'd want to create a detection. So if it's something that we think we could create a detection around. So I think it varies, but I would say weekly, monthly for some of those high fidelity hunts is a good goal to go after.
Yeah, I think you make a good point, right? Sometimes I think the reoccurring hunts also kind of goes to what is your return. So if you make that window too big, you might be getting good results that are worth looking at, but if you create a huge list to look at, it might be better to tighten that window just so that it gets more manageable, right?
Yeah.
In some aspects. So yeah.
Yeah, for sure. What kind of skills and talents do your threat hunters bring to the table? What areas do you typically focus on the most when you look at a threat hunter?
Yeah, so this kind of comes back to what telemetry do organizations usually have, and a lot of that comes to like endpoint data and network data. So I feel like if you have someone who's got really good understanding of your typical operating system and typically what runs on those operating systems, as well as even the environment they're in. So sometimes having that experience of working in a place for a while helps. And then networking skills. It's good to understand how things communicate. In general, some of the basic things with networking. You don't have to necessarily be a master of all those, but definitely having you're really comfortable with that kind of data is good. But there's also additional skills that I think just bring a lot to the table. I think a threat hunter is kind of well-rounded. So those might be their technical skills, but they definitely have knowledge with threat intel. They're used to seeing threat intel, reading threat intel. They understand instant response. A lot of times it's really muddy when you look at a threat hunter and instant responder because they kind of leverage a lot of the same skills when they're going after a threat. One, they know it's there. One, they don't know they're looking for. And then forensics, I think that's a good skill to have because it kind of closes that gap where if you don't have that really good endpoint knowledge, but you know how to look at that endpoint forensically, you learn a lot anyways. So it helps fill that gap. But really, when I look at threat hunting, like I mentioned before, you're kind of focusing on the human aspect a little bit because it's behaviors like the habits of a person or a threat. So it's really bridging that technology to adversary kind of approach. So, kind of, I guess, all that put into one, but, you don't have to be a master at all starting out. It's really good to have a place to start and kind of look at those other areas to improve.
Yeah, I mean, I think yeah, that's a really good point when it goes back to like the expertise and like a threat hunter kind of has many hats to an extent. They have to understand many aspects of cybersecurity, from incident response to more analytical stuff. Um, which I think is important. Some of the soft skills always come to mind when I'm thinking of a threat
Yeah.
hunter are they curious? I mean, you have to be a very curious individual to be successful at threat hunting because everything's not on the surface. And I would say, most things are not on the surface. And so it takes a really curious mind to have the grit to continue down a hunt to find, what's not easily found, that needle in the haystack. And then you touch like skill wise, you have to understand a little bit about detection, a little bit of analytical skills, probably a lot of analytical skills when it comes to deducting from some of your results. So I think those are some really strong skills and a lot of skills that a threat hunter needs to bring to the table. But as you said, like it is progressive. Like you can start somewhere, right? Like I think good solid foundation is someone who started in networking, which is probably one of the harder things to threat hunt when you're
Yeah.
just looking at traffic. And so I've seen a lot of successful people have backgrounds in networking to begin, and then kind of try to do some of those easier hunts, just looking for some IOCs, maybe some TTPs like brute forcing and things of that nature, and then kind of evolve into more data driven from the endpoint side. So yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, so I hear we're getting a lot of questions, so I think we'll pivot to kind of the Q&A session. Um,
Sounds good.
so uh, yeah, Josh, any questions that you can call out to see if we can try to answer the best as possible?
All right, guys, we've gotten a ton of great questions with quite a few more coming in. So if anyone else has any questions, don't forget to throw them in the chat. The first question is from Ed, and he has a burning question. Sysmon or Windows Event Log? What's your preference?
I'll jump right in if you want me to first. So one thing with Sysmon, there's a lot of OS stuff that's usually missing. I know they talked about newer versions including that, but Sysmon seems to be I favor Sysmon. There's some more telemetry about what processes are doing what in a lot of cases, and it's also easier to tune out unnecessary logging, which is nice. Now sometimes you might overtune and then you might be missing telemetry you may want. But it's also, you have to manage it, right? So it's a little harder to manage for people that aren't familiar with Sysmon. And then with Windows event logging, it's a great place to start, especially if you don't want to add any additional complexity or tooling, or it's hard to burn into your environment that way. But there's been some, one of the challenges I've found between the two is with registry-based stuff. And then also network logging, right? Windows is really hard to get some of that network logging unless you're going through the firewall-based things or firewall type events, but can be very verbose. So it's adding a lot to collection. And then with the registry, sometimes I've put auditing on certain registry keys, and sometimes when they're written to net new, I don't see a log, but when they're being touched or interacted with or updated, then I'll see the log. And I haven't been able to solve that one personally. But that's why I really like to fall back on Sysmon, because I haven't fallen into any of these like weird gaps where I know I really need that visibility for certain things.
Yeah, and I would probably agree with Scott here as well. Sysmon, there is a lot of configuration and management of Sysmon, but it's going to give you a little bit more capability, I think, and ability to fill some of those gaps in. Windows event logging, still a little bit of configuration, right? You got to have the right configuration for your Windows logging to capture command line arguments and so on and so forth, process creation.
Mm-hmm.
And they can be a little bit harder to understand to an extent. But yeah, I think, perfect world Sysmon, but I think you can do reasonable threat hunting with Windows event logs as well, given that you have the right configuration there.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Another question that came in was from Pedro, and he had noticed that both of you had used the term hunt package several times throughout the event. What exactly is a hunt package? Like, what's in it?
So go ahead. I'll let you start this one since I started last one.
Okay, I'll tell you this. Yeah, so a hunt package is basically a collection of TTPs that may be used, or indicators that may be used for an event. So if we talk about maybe a particular piece of malware, the package for a hunt for that piece of malware will probably include multiple different TTPs, multiple different types of IOCs and queries. In order to finish that whole hunt, there's usually not just one thing we're looking for. It's a collection of things to bring together to identify whatever that higher level thing is within inside the hunt.
Yeah, so our hunt package, and we use that term a little differently, but kind of the same end result, right? It's everything you need to find whatever behavior or specific target of things you're looking for. So it should include, and we include a lot of things in ours as far as like, like I mentioned before, some intel, some notes, you get the queries themselves and things like that, because we're giving that to you to perform specifically. But yeah, it's really, think of a hunt pack as it's basically the thing wrapped up in a bow that helps you do what you're specifically looking for with everything that you hopefully would need to do that. So
yeah, and one thing I also noticed kind of in your platform and how we document stuff, things important like remediation tactics are in a hunt package usually. False positives, what can generate a false positive is usually in that package as well. So just kind of think of it as the glossary of everything you need to know about whatever you're hunting, and put it in one spot.
Awesome. We got another question. We've actually gotten several people to ask this question, and we're going to break it up into two parts. So it's really around the core of dashboarding. Now, the first part of the question is, what would you as hunters want to look at first thing in the morning to get kind of a pulse on your environment, right? What kind of things could you dashboard or would you expect to want to see on a dashboard?
I can say, from our perspective, dashboarding wise, wake up, drink your cup of coffee. We need to see what's trending, what's really hit big from an external standpoint, not necessarily our environment generally, but look at how those things may affect our environment. So that's kind of morning coffee for a threat hunter, is understand, has anything changed since last night? Is there any new exploits, malware, vulnerabilities, different TTPs that are being used? But the other part of that is alerts are pretty strong from a threat hunting perspective. I think a dashboard showing the alerts that have fired from the systems over the last 24 hours or something, just to kind of get an idea of what are we seeing alert wise. And so maybe there's something hunting that we can either, maybe we can help tune that detection, or maybe there's something else we can look for to find other behaviors within inside the environment. I think I know my threat hunters in general always look at the EDR alerts just to kind of get an idea of what we're seeing. So I think those are good in the dashboard as well.
yeah, so I would say I mentioned earlier when it came to profiling. I think it's really cool if you've got some ways to profile your environment in general. And I always talk about profiling and doing diff. So I'm like creating the process in the fly for everybody right now, right? But like a good example for that would be, maybe I'm looking at who uses PowerShell in the environment on a day-to-day basis, and what's the diff of that on the next day, right? Like, wow, there's some new names that pop up. Well, those might be really worth just looking into, because that's just suspicious in general. And you don't you might not necessarily create alerts on something like that because it might not be worth a SOC analyst's time. But stuff like that that you can kind of just rule out of what's abnormal. And I think what Justin was talking to too, looking at alerts and things like that, help you kind of suss some of those things out as well.
Yeah, anything that would help generate a hypothesis, I think, would be a great start on a dashboard, because it's kind of the starting point for us.
Yeah, it's a great way to put it, the hypothesis generation. So Josh, I don't know, we're running on like 2 minutes here. Is this something where we have another question, or we want to kind of pivot?
There is just one quick last question. Akshay wants to know, what is your lightning bolt or weapon that you use to make businesses understand the gravity of the situation where they need to invest into increased visibility, such as new log sources or new tools for threat hunting? Is there one thing or that you can both kind of quickly touch on?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say being able to emulate some of the behaviors you're gonna have to deal with and not being able to see them. It's a valid way to just prove it, not just talk about it, but it's, able to say, look, this is what people are doing and we don't see this. And this is what a threat we're, up against, kind of thing. I think that stresses that issue pretty strongly. I don't know what you'd say to that, Justin.
No, I mean, I don't have much to add to that. That's exactly right. I mean, if you're emulating attacks that are happening today and you have zero visibility into them, it's a big, hey, look, we know threat actors are using this. Unfortunately, a lot of times it's, like you mentioned, Scott, it's after the fact, right? We're already in the weeds. We're
Right.
working in IR, and we realize, well, we don't have coverage here. And so that's where that strategic part of threat hunting can get you ahead of that. But we hope that IRs aren't the wake-up call to get visibility. So I think that those emulated attacks or even tabletops to understand what you have visibility into are really good, lightning bolt, so to say, to kind of strike the match and get things going on that end.
All right, so I'm going to pivot, Josh. So, for those that have joined us, if you really want to see some of the hunt packages we were talking about from the Cyborg side, we have our Hunter platform. You can get access with the promo code hybrid hunting to the community accounts with the QR codes shown there or the URL up there at the bottom. And I think, Justin, you guys have something else offered.
Yeah, and as I mentioned before, Nuspire does a quarterly threat report that just kind of shows our trending findings when it comes to exploits, malware, botnets, so on and so forth, different TTPs. You can pick up a copy of that using the URL below or the QR code, and I think we're actually going to drop the URL for that into the chat if you want to check that out.
So yeah, I want to thank everyone for joining us today for our webinar of the hybrid hunting, threat hunting in the managed security battle space. So we hope everyone found the information presented today valuable in developing your own hybrid hunting program. It's important to remember that threat hunting is an ongoing process, not a one-time event. And by leveraging the power of hybrid hunting, organizations can better allocate resources and expertise to effectively detect and respond to those threats. We encourage you to follow us on social media as we both, Cyborg and Nuspire, share valuable information about threat hunting and cybersecurity regularly. So please reach out to our teams with any questions or feedback. Thank you again for joining us today, and we look forward to continuing this conversation on hybrid hunting and threat hunting in general in the future. So happy hunting, everyone.
Happy hunting. Thank you.